All right, welcome to Cosmic Disclosure. I'm your host, David Wilcock. I'm here with Corey Good. And in this episode, we are going to be exploring some of the technologies of consciousness that have been used in a variety of contexts, both here on Earth and in the space program. We're going to be talking about remote viewing and remote influencing. All right, Corey, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, the conventional view of remote viewing that most people are familiar with started, at least when I first heard about it, was on the Art Bell show in the late 1990s. That he had guys coming on there like Major Ed Dames, who's saying that he was training people in remote viewing. And you had Joe McMoneagle, who supposedly did documentaries in Japan where he reunited people with their kids and remote viewed the location of the kid, brought them together, and then they filmed it on camera. So what is that basic type of remote viewing that most people are familiar with from those paranormal shows? What's happening there? What are they actually doing?
Well, everything in time and space is connected, and we can use our consciousness as a vehicle to travel and view whatever we like, whenever we like. Now, this is, the term technical remote viewing. All of this is pretty new to our lexicon, but it's something that we've been doing ever since we've been on this planet. We've had the ability to go into a deeper state of consciousness and remotely view and remotely influence other people and places. Now, this is something that the military started looking into after they found out the Russians were having some success with it. In the public sector, people have been training in remote viewing to do exactly what you've mentioned, which is, find lost children, lost items. So this is something that every person can use and train themselves in.
So it doesn't require any special gifts or special abilities?
No. They've proven that they can take just about anyone that's willing to learn it and has an interest and teach it to them, and they can be successful.
So we have remote viewing as this category where people are obtaining information, and then we have other categories of channeling where these elaborate UFO religions get started, and they don't have any reference point to anything else except their own internal cohesion. Then you see people that buy into that channeling, and they say, these beings are doing this in such and such place. This is absolutely the truth, but they have no validation outside of that. So what's the difference between what you're talking about as remote viewing and maybe some of these channeled teachings that some people think are credible, but then they don't line up with anything else?
Well, remote viewing, that when you get a target, they give you the information in the form of letters or numbers, something that you're not going to associate with a person, place, or thing.
The so-called coordinates?
Right, coordinates. They're going to try their best not to front load you with what the target is. So they'll go out of their way. The person that wrote the target on the piece of paper a lot of times won't even know what the target is. They'll hand it to a person who will hand it to a person that will bring it to the remote viewer to prevent any psychic leakage or bleed through. With the remote viewing, you view the target, but it isn't considered a hit until it's been verified. So in channeling, you are opening yourself up and pulling information from an unknown source, and it's never verified. Or maybe bits and pieces will be verified, but it's never fully verified.
Do you think there is some essential flaw in the human psyche where if a channeler gets a few things right or halfway right, that people just automatically want to believe everything that's said?
Once a person gets a little bit of validation from a source, a lot of times they quit validating. So they'll get a little bit of validation, open their minds, and accept everything that is given to them instead of validating every data point, which is what is done in remote viewing. Everything has to be validated. It's not considered successful until it's been validated.
So even the best remote viewers have brought in a lot of garbage data on their path to perfecting that skill.
Right. There's going to be a certain amount of the data that's coming from your subconscious. So that has to be filtered out. And they're not going to have one person, have a minimum of 3 usually, so they can triangulate. And they'll have usually a group of people do a remote viewing. And then the people that go through the data know how to ferret out the stuff that pops up through the different people's psyches. And they have personality profiles on the people, and they're able to clear out that information.
I've noticed myself that I will sometimes hear a song in my mind, and it seems to come in very spontaneously, but then I'll listen to the lyrics of the song, and I'll discover that that song lyric is a message, a spiritual message about what's going on. Remote viewing does seem to involve all the different senses, correct? It's not like it's only happening one way.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about the sensory experiences that happen when it's being done correctly? What is someone experiencing as they do it?
You won't know what the target is throughout almost the entire process. You'll be getting in all this sensory data, like wind, certain tastes, certain smells, smell of wet concrete, a taste of minerals, and maybe you'll get some auditory input. The visual input is stronger in some people than in others. And the visual input is being fed also by other sensory data. Your mind is putting together something visual out of all of this. So it depends on the individual how accurate of a picture they can put together from all the sensory input that they're getting from viewing a target.
So are there any protocols in terms of when you first sit down to do this? Are there things that you could have happening to you that would interrupt your ability to do this well?
Yes, you have to totally clear your mind. You have to make sure that you don't have any information on the target. If you're front-loaded, every bit of information that you give on the target is going to be corrupt in some way. I mean, that's preserving the integrity of the target is extremely important in the process. And also, the viewers need to have a clear state of mind while viewing so that they don't feed in information from other feelings and that they're bringing in from their personal lives.
In some of the remote viewing instructional books that I've read, it says that you can't be hungry, you can't be overly tired, and you can't need to go to the bathroom before you start. Would you agree with all that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Why would that be a factor?
They're distractions. When they would train children in remote viewing, they would put them in deprivation chambers. So there was no other sensory input other than the target, the information coming in from the target. And as they got more proficient, they could, sit at a table in a room with activity going on and be able to focus on the target.
So the so-called average person obviously is not average. That's one of the things we're hearing here. We all have this ability. What kind of things could an average person, quote unquote, be able to do if they were properly trained in this discipline?
Well,
how far does this go?
It depends on the individual. And there's also remote influencing. They can train people to actually have an effect over great distances at a location. So you can influence people to behave a certain way. And there's also technological enhanced remote viewing and remote influencing that is used as a weapon system that can be used to kill people.
Technological how?
Well, the systems I saw, there were basically 2 plates. It was like an anode and cathode that hooked up to a black box system that then was hooked up to basically an antenna array. When the person was remote viewing or going into this deep theta state that these people in the space program were able to achieve, is like a conscious theta state, it would enhance and boost their abilities and focus them through this technology. Some of these people, they can make a person's heart stop beating, make them have an aneurysm. They can do all kinds of things remotely.
And that's with the technology.
Right. Well, some of them that have used the technology so much are they've become enhanced. They use these weapon systems a lot, and they can kill people and harm people without the technology.
So let's just talk back now about the average person, quote unquote, doing this technique. If you get somebody who becomes really good at this, are they limited to seeing something in the present, or does this also involve the ability to look through time, to see timelines, probable futures?
Probable futures, looking in the past. Yes, all of these are things that are possible with remote viewing. Looking into the future is very, it's very difficult because free will comes in, and there's always things that change the future a little bit. So that's why they call it probable future.
When you're talking about the fact that people shouldn't know anything about the target, are there other protocols in place to prevent the mind from engaging with the information and trying to understand what it's seeing?
Yeah, that comes with practice. We were talking about the weapon systems that I forgot to mention that they also use these to guard facilities, aircraft, spacecraft. They will shield them from being remote viewed. So remote viewers, if you were trying to view a certain facility, they have people that are basically on etheric guard. And if someone comes in and tries to remote view, then remote viewers call them those who scatter. Right when they start to lock in on the target, they find their thought, it just gets scattered. And they use technology to enhance them when they're doing this. When I was a kid, they would find out each of us, what our gift or ability was, and try to teach us to use that to protect ourselves from people remote viewing us. And the method that they taught me was visualizing a counter-rotating blue ball around me, one spinning this way, one spinning that way, and picture it spinning faster and faster in each direction, and picture who or whatever's remote viewing you or trying to remote influence you being pulled into it, and then grab each end and pull it tight to where it snaps. And it shoots energy back through the person who is remote viewing you, and it gives them what they call an etheric headache. And it can give them a very severe headache and other problems for several days.
The whistleblower who we're calling Daniel, that gave me the information about Montauk, among other things, because he claims to have worked there, said that at one point he was recruited for this psychic program. He had somebody come up to him on the base and say, hey, what do you think about ESP? Just seemingly casual. Then they say, hey, if you're interested, they say, hey, we could kind of bring you into this class, and you get paid for it as part of your military service. And then he also said there were Nazi recruiters too. Hey, what do you think about those Jews? That kind of stuff.
The Nazis were experimenting with remote viewing way before the Russians were. That's where they got the idea from, is after Operation Paperclip, the Russian version.
Are you familiar with this recruitment technique where somebody will walk up to you and just start a seemingly random conversation, but there's an agenda behind it?
Oh yeah, it's happened to me many times. Once you know that tactic, it's pretty obvious. They coming in and testing the waters, sticking their toe in to see, if the water's good, see if they can go in more.
All right, so let's talk about the next thing that happened to Daniel. He gets brought into this room with this guy they call the professor. The professor has bald head, white on the sides, and the glasses. The professor is reading off a piece of paper. He's looking at him. He's asking him these questions. And as the questions are being asked, the seemingly boring psychological evaluation questions, Daniel is getting this absolutely terrible psychic attack from this professor, this pain in his mind. It's like a screaming, like fingernails on chalkboard, grinding metal. And he told me that if you don't go, what the hell are you doing, to this guy, that you failed the test.
Right.
Have you ever heard of anything like that?
I've experienced something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
So what happened to you?
Well,
similar story?
Yes.
Let's hear about that.
And it happened many times. Yeah, you have to be able to identify not only one other person in the room, but there will be multiple people in the room, and there will be like a group that's interviewing you about a certain training you went through, and you will receive that same kind of splinter in your brain kind of pain, and you'll know that you're being etherically attacked, and you have to identify who it is. And that's not easy when you've got, a room of, 3, 4, 6 people, all of whom are heavily trained in how to do this.
In this case, he said that if you don't have that reaction, that you fail and you're not brought into the psychic training program at all.
Yeah. Well, at this point, you're already in it.
Right,
but,
right. Now, another thing that we've heard from other whistleblowers is that, unfortunately, since a lot of this stuff becomes black magic and occult, that people will make deals with certain demons or certain entities that attach into their system that will defend them against attacks from other remote viewers as they're doing this work. Are you familiar with anything like that?
Yes, yes. Definitely some of these darker practitioners will use what they call black magic to invite or use entity attachments to protect themselves, just as these entity attachments can be used for all kinds of things, but that can definitely be one of the uses.
So let's talk a little bit more about the remote influencing. We're saying now that people can be influenced to have certain thoughts.
To have certain thoughts that lead to certain actions. To say there's a senator that you really want to affect their ability to govern, or they're working on a bill that you really don't want them to work on. First, they'll do a psychological profile, find out their proclivities, what they're interested in, and begin to remotely influence them and get them to act upon things that they wouldn't normally act upon. A lot of people, you have thoughts or fantasies that enter your mind momentarily, but you would never act upon. But this breaks them down a little bit to where they are more likely to act upon it. And the more that they are influenced, the more likely they are, the more people that are working on them, the more likely they are to make that mistake and then have a big scandal that ends up in the news, and they get distracted from the bill that they're working on.
So when you read like T. Lobsang Rampa, Masters and Teachings of the Far East,
I can't even say
it. They're talking about these Tibetans, and that some of these Tibetan guys were doing black magic. And in the Masters of the Far East book, it describes some of these. It was very dangerous practice, but a method of assassination where they would charge a dagger with the energy so that they'd place the dagger near where somebody normally is, and that person would become irresistibly compelled to pick up the dagger and actually kill themselves with it. But apparently if you do this, it's extremely dangerous because you could end up taking the dagger and killing yourself with it. So have you heard of anything that extreme, like charging of objects with magical intention?
I've heard of people basically using their consciousness on inanimate objects, but not charging an object to where if a person touches it, it causes them to act.
Well, let's talk about the voodoo stuff for a moment, because that would appear to be a type of remote influencing.
Yeah.
The basic thing you're describing is the same. Somebody creates a doll that's like an effigy of you, and then they maybe stick pins in it, and then apparently some of that is the fear of seeing the doll.
Yeah, and one of the keys is your target seeing the doll.
Right.
Because when they see it, a psychological thing happens that also co-create the experience for the practitioner. So much of what is occurring is being actually created or co-created by the target.
So would you say that there is an entity attachment to the doll, that there's some kind of spiritual presence that's put into the doll that can be invited into someone when they look at it?
That can be part of it, but there doesn't have to be an entity involved at all. It can be, if this person grew up in this culture and has a strong belief that there's power in this object, this doll that now has needles in it, and they receive this effigy of themselves with needles in a certain part, their mind will create these problems in their body.
Right.
So they manifest the magic that the person's trying to create.
Sure. What do you think about the use of scopolamine in this voodoo tradition? Is there, first of all, let's just briefly recap the use of scopolamine in these voodoo cultures. What do you know about scopolamine? What does it do?
Scopolamine is very nasty. I believe it's a seed that grows on a plant, and I can't remember the name of the plant.
Datura.
Datura. And I believe they crush it up and use the flesh on the inside.
Yeah.
And dry it out and use it as a powder. But it basically takes away free will. A lot of the times it's used to rob people. They'll give the person a drug at a bar, a lot in South America, and the people will, once the drug kicks in, the person that administered the drug will say, "Take me to your house and give me all of your possessions." And they'll happily put them in their car, drive them to their house, help them load all the possessions into a truck, and the person will leave and the drug will wear off and the people will be bewildered at what happened.
But let's get into this. Can you give someone scopolamine and then give them a voodoo curse that they don't remember consciously, but it's somehow loaded into their mind?
Most of what's happening is on a subconscious level. So the information could be loaded into the subconscious, and consciously they have no idea what's going on.
So that could be used to enhance the effects, like they could be given post-hypnotic suggestions under scopolamine.
Yes.
So then when they see the doll, they have this suggestion that's already leaning them in a certain direction.
Right. In the programs, they use a synthetic form of scopolamine and a cocktail of other drugs when they were doing chemical blank slating.
And could they use that to plant hypnotic suggestions as well?
Yes. During the blank slating, you're losing memory of incidents. They're also implanting hypnotic suggestions in case you start to remember. So it's like a backdoor kind of protection.
When I was in high school, there was, I think it was on Fox, when Fox first came out, that channel, there was a show called Friday the 13th, and it wasn't based on the Jason movies at all. Every week, the show was about this older man and then his attractive female assistant who worked in an antiques shop. And it wasn't really antiques. What was happening was they kept getting these objects, these weird old objects that were charged with some kind of spirit or entity or something like that. So every week it was that the object was causing murders to happen, and they had to kind of track down the entity. It seems like if somebody's going to do a whole show based on that, and we know there's a lot of leakage going on, that this idea of objects being able to remote influence people is not just a theory. So can there be objects that have a charge on them somehow that cause remote influencing? Well, like antique objects or maybe even from ancient civilizations, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, objects can hold on to the energy of their environment. And if they're charged with a certain type of energy, they can hold that until they're neutralized or charged with a different energy. So they will hold that energy and emanate that energy until they're neutralized.
So we've been talking about remote influencing and some of the ways in which ancient traditions have done it and how it's kind of been maybe incorporated and modernized in these secret programs that we're discussing. So let's switch back now to remote viewing so we can kind of exit this episode in something more positive. What are some of the examples, some of the most dramatic, eye-popping examples that you personally saw of remote viewing being a success?
I wouldn't say this is super positive, but I would read reports of facilities or bases of like non-terrestrials that we were planning on attacking or doing infiltrations of that we had not seen or had no intelligence on. They would have several remote viewers view the location and get a physical layout of what the place looked like. And the operators would use that to build a duplicate and practice their attack.
Wow.
And then it would be almost exactly like the layout that they were given when they would actually arrive on the scene. And it was critical to their success.
What was the most stunning personal example of a remote viewing that you yourself have done?
One I have up on my website might have been in 1989. I was tasked with doing a remote viewing, and it ended up being the Nemesis star, I believe, is what the target was. And I found myself, when I realized that it was a star, I realized that I was outside of our solar system, looking back at our solar system, and our solar system looked sort of like a crescent moon kind of comet, almost. And I could feel the interstellar winds hitting me, and I felt like a piece of taffy being pulled all around. And I was able to, it was one of the most vivid experiences I had, and I described it in quite a bit of detail.
You also went into something about this idea of a solar flash that came to you in a remote viewing.
Yes.
And I think it would be good to hear that story in context of everything we've been discussing.
Yes, and it's been a while, so I don't remember all the details, but yes, it was a remote viewing of, and there were beings in the sky, and they would point down, and each time they would point down, something was occurring that I was remote viewing on the Earth, and towards the end of the viewing, there were, from the sun came a flash, 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 and after that, it was in the remote viewing, all of the people of the Earth came together and started like holding hands and singing, and were very happy. And I saw all these negative people looking like they were just falling backwards, but disappearing, just like they were just falling off the Earth and disappearing.
Now, you had no idea what you were going to be looking at when that happened?
No.
Did this corroborate with other remote viewing data that they had?
I was not privy. Usually give the information, and that's it. You don't receive feedback, which can be very frustrating because you want to have validation so you can build your confidence. But once you get to a certain point to where you're proficient, you don't get that constant validation. You're just doing the job, and they'll give you a target, you task the target, they take the information, and then you move on to the next target.
But you heard about this flash from others in different contexts, not maybe...
Right, I'd heard about certain people remote viewing. Some people would view and they would see the Earth being destroyed by fire. Some people would view, different people were seeing different things. I do know that, but I don't know all the details. But I think they were trying to figure out when and what was going to happen with the sun.
But yours sounds almost like a Christian rapture kind of vision.
Right.
And ascension.
And they knew my background and all of that, so they approach that information with, okay, here's his profile, this is how he was raised, this is his belief system, so that's going to affect the data this way. And they're going to try to pull out the raw data that they're looking for that, causes their flags to pop.
But do you think that different people could be on different timelines where they're going to experience that event differently once it happens?
Yes, but that's speculation until the moment occurs.
Right, of course. All right, well, you heard it here. We're remote viewing our way through another great episode. This is Cosmic Disclosure. I'm your host, David Wilcock. We'll see you next time.
Lexicon, but it's something that we've been doing ever since we've been on this planet. We've had the ability to go into a deeper state of consciousness and remotely view and remotely influence other people and places. Now, this is something that the military started looking into after they found out the Russians were having some success with it. In the public sector, people have been training in remote viewing to do exactly what you've mentioned, which is, find lost children, lost items. So this is something that every person can use and train themselves in.
So it doesn't require any special gifts or special abilities?
No. They've proven that they can take just about anyone that's willing to learn it.
All right, welcome to Cosmic Disclosure. I'm your host, David Wilcock. I'm here with Corey Good. And in this episode, we are going to be exploring some of the technologies of consciousness that have been used in a variety of contexts, both here on Earth and in the space program. We're going to be talking about remote viewing and remote influencing. All right, Corey, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, the conventional view of remote viewing that most people are familiar with started, at least when I first heard about it, was on the Art Bell show.
Has an interest and teach it to them, and they can be successful.
So we have remote viewing as this category where people are obtaining information, and then we have other categories of channeling where these elaborate UFO religions get started, and they don't have any reference point to anything else except their own internal cohesion. Then you see people that buy into that channeling, and they say, these beings are doing this in such and such place. This is absolutely the truth. But they have no validation outside of that. So what's the difference between what you're talking about as remote viewing and maybe some of these channeled teachings that some people think are credible, but then they don't line up with anything else?
Well, remote viewing, that when you get a target, they give you the information in the form of letters or numbers, something that you're not going to associate with a person, place, or thing.
The so-called coordinates?
Right, coordinates. They're going to try their best not to front load you with what the target is. So they'll go out of their way. The person that wrote the target on the piece of paper a lot of times won't even know what the target is. They'll hand it to a person who will hand it to a person that will bring it to the remote viewer to prevent any psychic leakage or bleed through. With the remote viewing, you view the target, but it isn't considered a hit until it's been verified. So in channeling, you are opening yourself up and pulling information from an unknown source, and it's never verified. Or maybe bits and pieces will be verified, but it's never fully verified.
Late 1990s, that he had guys coming on there like Major Ed Dames, who's saying that he was training people in remote viewing. And you had Joe McMoneagle, who supposedly did documentaries in Japan where he reunited people with their kids and remote viewed the location of the kid, brought them together, and then they filmed it on camera. So what is that basic type of remote viewing that most people are familiar with from those paranormal shows? What's happening there? What are they actually doing?
Well, everything in time and space is connected, and we can use our consciousness as a vehicle to travel and view whatever we like, whenever we like. Now, this is, the term technical remote viewing. All of this is pretty new to our